Good evening, everybody. It's 9:30 on the East Coast, 6:30 on the West Coast. That must mean it's time for your weekly Calamity Jane live stream. James, how are you doing on this surprisingly not too bad summer evening, at least here in Atlanta?
No, same here. It's been nice and chill on our side too, so that's great. I'm glad that there's some equilibrium in our stream force tonight to
I know,
where
I
you have the
know.
same weather I do. So that's
Yes,
good.
it's true. Although you probably still got a little sunlight out there where it's pretty dark here now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, everything's good on my side. It sounds like things are going well on your side too.
They go, sometimes keep it on is just what the doctor ordered. So no complaints there.
Nice. Well, I mean, I could roll right into what I'll work on tonight, and then we can pick our topic or topics for our stream as we go.
Sounds like a plan to me.
All right. So when we last week we left off, and I was working on these poses here for
Mm-hmm.
Clemmy to walk out. I can still keep working on this, but the rough animation's there. I mean, it definitely needs more polish. And I'm gonna just go roll into this next shot here.
All right.
From rear view, and then have her jump as she reacts to what's going on outside of the prickly pear. So we'll work on a couple poses tonight and go from there.
That sounds good. Seems like a pretty new pose. I don't know that you've ever done any work on Calamity from the back with her hood up.
Yeah, if we consult our master file, we have a little bit here, some workings of a back view here, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to work for us because it's more three quarters. This is three quarters, but I'm actually going to do another pose to kind of push it more. I actually like this drawing here. It's a little
Mm.
bit more back than three
Mm-hmm.
quarters, sort of. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna just draw it from scratch tonight, and we'll just add another pose to our library. So if anything, so
Okay.
all good. One thing
Works
that's
for me.
interesting too
Mm-hmm.
is as I have her put up her hood, she puts her hands back in her pockets here. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
subtle, but that's the whole idea. Is her hands are back in her pockets. She's trying to be incognito. Here, her hands are back out of her pocket, but I'm going to tuck them back in
She can still
to help.
pull them out of her hoodie. Like that
Yes,
pose remains
yeah,
unaffected. Yeah.
yes, exactly, and that helps accentuate how shocked she is when her hands do come back out again.
Mm-hmm.
So just one small little minor thing I might tweak compared to the drawing. But yeah, so that's the plan. Let's see how
Excellent.
it goes.
Excellent. Well,
So I,
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna get you started because I know yesterday we were talking about this, but maybe you had something else in mind. But the NES Championship game came out,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you got it, and I've been debating getting it myself. But
There's
anyway,
plenty to
sorry, I
talk about.
talked
Yeah,
over
yeah.
you.
Yeah, no. That's fine. That's definitely one of the things. The Boys season 4 is wrapped up. That's another topic
Yeah.
we could broach. And Capcom just released. Uh, Capcom remains my second favorite game developer slash publisher in the world, and it has been that way for a very long time. I mean, everybody knows what number one is at this point. Clearly, it's EA. And but Capcom too. Some of my favorite um, franchises originated, with their studios, from Okami and Mega Man to Street Fighter and Final Fight, and it just the list goes on and on with the stuff that they do. The Phoenix Wright games, and they've just released a new game that I have no idea if it's going to move the needle for anybody, but it's called Kunitsu-Gami, The Path of the Goddess, and it is this weird hybrid action game slash tower defense slash real time strategy game that is very heavily steeped in Japanese mythology, and it is just so much fun. And I won't belabor the point because I know you don't know that much about it, but I just wanted to give a quick shout out to it for anybody who watches this. If you're a video game fan like James and I are, and you're kind of tired of the same old dredge that is constantly being crapped out by most publishers, and even Nintendo is guilty of this from time to time. Um, uh, you should owe it to yourself to check it out because it is one of the most original, refreshing, high polished games I've played in a very long time.
So let me add some skepticism to this, but the fact that
Skipped
you
away.
like it yeah, the fact you like it, I mean, I'm just mainly just doing this just for argumentative sake,
Oh yeah,
I
please.
guess. But when you were describing the game to me, it reminded me right off the bat. My memory banks went to this really cool game that Jack Black was part of called Brutal Legend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Brutal Legend was trying to do everything. It was like the kitchen sink kind of game. It had action elements to it, RPG elements into it. Oh, also, by the way, it's an RTS game. So when you're telling me about this new game that you're talking about that you're really into, I can't help but put my rate, my flashes on going, man, is it trying to be too much too soon? Is it gonna fall under its own weight, trying to satisfy too many genres of game all within one? Does it do it successfully? How long you're playing the demo right now, right?
No, the actual game is out, and almost
Okay.
I'm getting close to about 10 hours in to the main game now.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Um, so I really like Brutal Legend.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, yes, it was kind of like an all things to all people kind of game. And this game is not nearly as broad in scope. Um,
Okay.
it is not. It's got a very intentionally designed, very closed stages that have come in consumable chunks. You're controlling. At this point, I'm up to 8 troops at a time, and I don't think it's going to get much larger than 10. Um, there are a wider variety of classes than there were in Brutal Legend, but a lot of the subclasses are very niche based, and you sort of only use them for a particular type of stage. Um, and it's not it does a much better job of being honest with what the game is than Brutal Legend was, and I'm not going to fault Double Fine for that. That
Mm-hmm.
for in my mind squarely falls into EA's marketing. They just
Mm-hmm.
had so little faith in the game they couldn't bring themselves to market it on the merits.
And this is why I brought up Brutal Legend, because you are a huge fan of EA.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that we touch on that a little bit. But yeah,
Yeah.
but sorry, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of Brutal Legend, and I feel like we've even mentioned this on the stream, like I didn't like the game. EA sold me on a product that it was not. And it
Hmm.
wasn't until Tim Schafer actually wrote an essay explaining how to play
Yeah.
Brutal Legend that I was like, oh, I was completely approaching this game in the wrong way. And I went back and was like, okay, now I get it. And it was great, right?
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
there's something to be said that you shouldn't have to have the owner of a company write an essay
Yeah.
explaining how to play their game. That being
Yes.
said, you know, once you once you get past that sort of like maybe you should have spent more time on the early game and explaining how to play it, uh, it was great, you know. But this game is not nearly as broad or as sweeping as Brutal Legend is. It's a lot more focused. It's a smaller game, I feel, in scope. But I also, at least at this very early stage, my initial reactions are much stronger than my initial reactions to Brutal Legends. Um, again, I'm only 10 hours in, and it seems like a pretty hefty game, you know. Um, so who knows? I've played games that I've really had really strong first impressions with that I ended up hating by the end, and that could be the case with this one. But at least at this point, I've been thoroughly enjoying it. So just as sort of a please, if you're looking for something new, if you're looking for something interesting, and you really want a sort of a fresh take on a video game, I can't recommend it enough. I really can't.
So
Even if
when
you
you're
only
saying
play it for 10 hours.
so when you're saying it's a fresh take on a game, it has all these genres of games. So what makes it fresh? Like
Well, again,
it's just
yeah. When I mean fresh, I mean I'm not talking like I feel like at least in the at this point we are past the point where anything is really going to be truly novel, and that's fine,
hmm.
right? There's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that. I mean, you can say the same thing about television and film. Um, uh, while there are always new ideas and new stories, you can always trace them back to some other inspiration point, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think it was Isaac Newton that says, if I have come so far, it is only because I have stood on the shoulders of giants, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I think that that's a very appropriate, reasonable statement. And so the reason it's fresh because it takes familiar mechanics and
Hmm.
uses them in interesting ways, and it presents it in a very interesting package, right?
Okay.
So you played Plants vs Zombies, you've played other real-time strategy games, you've played action games, and it takes these three very different genres and blends them in a way that I find very unique and interesting. And
Okay.
and beyond that too, I mean, we've talked about this at length. The aesthetics of the game are very appealing, right? Like we've spoken. I stuck with Monster Hunter partially because the aesthetics of the game were very appealing to me and how it didn't take itself
Hmm.
very seriously, and I love the colors and that kind of stuff, and the the monsters designs are very interesting. Um, but with the Souls games and Elden Ring and Bloodborne and all those, I don't find the visuals compelling, and it's
Hmm.
not for me fun to look at, and so I didn't spend the time to master the game mechanics. But at least with Kunitsu-Gami, the aesthetics are amazing. The monster design is horrible and silly and colorful and scary all at the same time, and the world that the game exists in is very lovingly crafted. So much so that they actually built actual models of buildings and shrines and structures that they built the actual the 3D models from, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
They captured fireworks, they captured fabric streaming, ribbon twirling and things of that nature. They captured all these very real, intricate effects and basically digitize them and use them as the baseline for particle effects and objects and everything within the game. I mean, if you look at some of the making of featurette stuff on this, I don't know how it got greenlit, but it is without a doubt a work of passion. Um,
Huh.
and I just so happened on Capcom's Instagram today, they actually commissioned with, and I don't know what it is, but I think it is a natural endowment for puppetry arts in Japan, whatever that's called. They commissioned a play of the prologue of the game using puppets, and
What?
they composed a traditional Japanese. I don't know what the official term is, but it's sort of like a hymnal or a monastic chant or something along those lines. So the whole prologue is told via puppets and traditional Japanese music, with a digital display that with graphics from the game in the background that have like changing day night cycles, and the corruption grows and shrinks. I mean, it's crazy how much money they have put into the marketing of this game, and it's just lovely. Um, and my biggest fear is that for all the complaining that everybody does about how there's nothing ever new coming out in the games industry,
Uh-huh.
that a game like this, which feels so fresh and so original, and it is so lovingly crafted, and it's at least again 10 hours in, remarkably fun. Um, the idea that this wouldn't find an audience and disappears into the ether of overlooked games, it would be disheartening to me if that happened. Um, So yeah, again, I highly recommend it. The longer I play it, the more I like it. I think my biggest complaint about this at this point is there are some balance issues. The difficulty
Hmm.
goes way up and down, right? They needed to
Okay.
probably spend more time balancing out um, like the increase in scope, because you'll finish the stage, but then the boss that you have to fight at the end is way more difficult than the stage was, and you're like, oh, whoa, whoa, what? Um, but to this point, aside from some backtracking to unlock some more power ups and some rejiggering of skill trees and whatnot, which the game encourages you to do, right? It's built around you constantly reassociating skill points to all the different troop types that you have. Like that's the whole point of the game, or not the whole point of the game, but that's a huge component of the game. After I spent some time doing that, then you beat the boss. And once you find the strategy that works, then all of a sudden the boss is trivially easy, and you're like, why did that take me so hard to do in the first place, right? Um,
Hmm.
But that being said, right, like I usually only really want to attempt a boss once or twice, at most 3 times, right? And it took me 5 or 6 times for this one boss to actually beat it. So that was above my preference for boss battles.
Uh-huh.
But aside from some difficulty, balance curve issues, I've really, really been enjoying it so far.
So yeah, the funny thing like the sad thing is like how games now, a lot of them are like sweeping epic type of games. So
Mm-hmm.
10 hours in, uh, for a standard single player experience type of game, you would be about halfway. But this type of game sounds like a sweeping epic type of thing where you're really maybe 10% into the game, right? So it makes me wonder, like, I hope that you continue enjoying it and
Yeah.
it stays the same. As long if it plateaus, great. I mean, the fact that it ramped up, like even if it plateaus at this point, that's a great sweet spot to be in for a game for like the time. Um, so I'm just curious, like if you got an impression yet. 10 hours in, is it just too early versus
Yeah. Yeah. That
uh,
thought has crossed my mind too, and I don't have an answer yet. We'll know as I
mm,
continue to play if I lose my nerve on it. But at least to this point, at the very least, the one thing you can't claim is that it's an also ran. I mean, it is one of the most
mm-hmm,
original, unique games I've played in a long time.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've said my piece on that. The demo is out on every platform but Switch. Highly recommend downloading it. Although I will say the demo doesn't do as good a job selling it as it really should. Um, it's not that it's trying to obscure what the game is, but the stages that they have you play aren't reflective of the actual game progression, and so it might give you a false impression of the difficulty. Um, and
Is it
so
really easy? Is the demo like super easy or something?
the
Or
no, the demo, the first 2 stages are fine, but then once you beat the first 2 stages in one of the bosses, it unlocks this like third stage, and it is just way, way, way beyond the scope of difficulty that the other 2 stages are. And it makes me wonder why they did that. Because I actually got to that stage, or at least that environment, in the actual game, and it is not even remotely as difficult as that stage was in the demo.
huh?
So the demo, it featured enemies that weren't even in that stage in the final game. So a part of me wonders, like, I don't really know. Maybe they released a demo and then rebalanced that map after the demo shipped. I don't know. Um, Suffice it to say, like, play the first 2 stages, get a feel for what the core is, and then if you really, really just want more from the demo, then you can try that third stage. But it is way harder than what I experienced in the game to this point.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that.
I will be downloading it this week, at least the demo, and I'll be checking it out
Okay, okay,
at some point. I've wrapped up my I've pretty much wrapped up my run on this game I've been obsessed with called Monster Train.
okay.
It's a deck builder game. It's fun. I mean, if you like deck builder type of games, it's great if you are trying to scratch that Slay the Spire itch. I think that one kind of in most game circles, people love Slay the Spire, and then they always refer to Monster Train as an alternative if you still want to get that fix. You have to beat it pretty much 25 times to thoroughly beat the game, but the ending you can pretty much see pretty much I think the first time you beat it or something, or
Wow.
5 times in or something like that.
All right.
It's not about the ending at all. It's just about playing it and challenging it and trying different combinations of card sets. There's like different races of cards that you go into each battle with two types of races that kind of create different combinations as you go through the levels. Yeah, and it's a fun game. And then you unlock as you play and you advance your rank and your difficulty levels. You can unlock other types of cards and you add more to your potential deck as you play the next time around. But it's been great. So now that I've kind of retired that game, yeah, maybe I'll check out the demo now
Mm-hmm.
that it's out and give it a shot. But I'm also torn because that NES Championship game
Yes,
came
yes.
out over the weekend too. So, and you got that one too. So,
I did,
yeah.
yes. In all fairness, I didn't. I got that one. I bought it, pre-ordered it a long time ago because Nintendo is notorious about underproducing their collector's editions, and It
Mm-hmm.
was one of the rare situations where I was actually able to score. Well, I thought at the time score one of the collector's editions, even though now apparently they're everywhere. Um, and and it's quite entertaining. The jury's still out on it. I like it a lot. My first impressions, in fact, I liked it more than I thought I was going to. You find
Mm-hmm.
yourself getting wrapped in, and it's sort of that classic, just one more challenge, just one more challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the game's sweet spot really is in the multiplayer. So the whole premise is that it's inspired by that old Nintendo World Champion contest that they held in the 80s, and they did a follow up one in the early 2000s. I want to say
Mm-hmm.
the movie The Wizard was loosely based on this competition, um, and so they've kind of taken the notion of that contest and then distilled it into a game. And so you play these varying length speed run challenges, right? Like kill 4 Octoroks in the original Legend of Zelda, or
Mm-hmm.
climb one of the pits in Metroid and make it through a blue door, or how quickly can you get a super mushroom in Super Mario Brothers, right?
Yeah.
And very very simple basic premise, but it's super fun, right? It was made by the same people who did the NES remix games.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you can kind of get a sense of the pedigree, because those are really really polished, really fun kind of games that were easy to get lost in, like, oh, just one more challenge, oh, just one more challenge, um
Yeah.
and uh um and so it has that same kind of vibe. But we talked about this. The problem with a speedrunning game is that on a technical level there really is an upper bounds of how fast you can do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
The game runs at X number of SPS, the screen is X number of pixels wide and tall, right?
Yep.
The input delay from a button press to the on-screen response is X number of milliseconds. All of these things are finite, quantized pieces of data, and it, you know, technically speaking, there is an upper limit of how fast you can accomplish something. And so the single player, um, well, obviously is fun and that'll last a while, because you are trying to push as close to that maximum wall as possible, right? And doing
Mm-hmm.
that for all 150 challenges would be impressive. So that in and of itself is, if you like that replaying, if you like this sort of self, competing with yourself to improve your score, um, then there's a lot of mileage in that. I think for me, actually, the weakest part of the game is the online competition.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not unique to this game. This is the case with basically any competitive online game, is that very quickly there are people who are going to be a lot better than you playing it, ruining the curve for everybody else. And no one has really perfected how to silo different skill levels. I don't know that there really is a way to do that, because a lot of it is dependent on the number of players who are playing the game, and of those players what their skill level is at, and how many new players are coming in versus how many veterans are staying versus leaving, etc., etc. And already I'm seeing a problem with it. So there's the online competitive mode. You basically play against the ghost data of a bunch of other people who have already competed in the space or completed that challenge in single player mode. And
Mm-hmm.
it runs like an elimination where you start with 8 players, the first 4 advance, and then then only the 3 advance, and then the last challenge is only the last 2 compete, and then there's one winner, right? But already what I'm seeing is that when you're playing on the lower skill levels, it's fine, right? But when you play on like the gold tier, there's already speedrunners who have mastered the game 2 days after it's come out, because this is what they do, right? This is their hobby. And so they've already ruined the curve for a lot of players, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I have yet to even place in the top 3 of the high skill level, right? And I'm not, I mean, I've played all of these games a lot. I'm not new to any of these. I'm pretty good with them, right? I can usually get an A plus plus rating on my first attempt at most of these challenges. Um, and yet, and yet, right? I can't even get into the top three on the high skill category,
Mhm.
which is not too surprising, but it's not particularly encouraging to play, right? But I think the real like I said, the real meat of the game is in the couch co-op, right? It supports up to 8 players, which is really cool. Um, and basically what it is you do the speed challenges, but you do them with friends who are sitting next to you on the couch, and it is because speedrunning is such a competitive, intense burst of a thing, you can get really, really engaged with it very, very quickly. And I think that it has a lot of potential to be sort of a go-to party game if you have the right kind of mindset of people playing with you, right?
Mhm.
If people who enjoy those old nostalgia games from the NES, people who are into competitive play and sort of perfecting their scores, and people who are sort of competitive with each other, the game could have really, really long legs if it can find that audience. Um, and yeah, I mean, I dig it. I've played it far less than I have Kunitsu-Gami at this point, partially because I, I will admit this. My one thing I do is when I get drunk, I make drunk purchases. It's not a unique thing. I think most people do that. Um, and obviously this is all obviously very calculated on Nintendo's part, but to sort of commemorate the launch of this game, they put the Switch NES controllers, right? The ones that you can like slide in on either side of the Switch to charge.
Mhm.
They put those on sale for like 25% off. And so I drunkenly bought those, right? But it gets better though. um, when I went to the shopping cart, they always, and Nintendo is not the only one. Everybody does this, but it's just sort of like, um, you're $2 shy of getting free shipping. If you just spend $2 more, we'll give you free shipping. And $2 more was less than the cost of shipping. So I'm like, all right, I can find something that's the cost about $2, and on net it'll save me a little money. Pretty standard drunken boy math kind of stuff. Um, And so I'm scrolling around. I'm like, I don't really, I guess I could work that. That could work. And then it popped up. I was like, oh, you, in your past, you bought the Nintendo 64 controller. You bought the Super Nintendo controller. Your NES controllers are in your cart right now. Did you know that there's a wireless Genesis controller that's compatible with the Switch? And I'm like, son of a bitch. So I was like, yes, I'll do that one. And so they got me. And so I drunkenly purchased the NES controllers and the Genesis controllers, and it shipped, so I can't cancel them at this point. And they
So
are
wait, you don't have them. You don't have them just yet.
they are in the mail on the way here as we speak. Um, and so when those show up in the next couple of days, then I'll probably revisit the NES remix because I feel like playing it on the NES pad will bring back a lot of muscle memory. I mean, we've talked about this, how I played the N64 games on the Switch and using a Pro controller and was doing terrible with them. Like they weren't even fun. And then I bought the wireless N64 controller and I'm like, "Oh my god, I remember how to play these games now," right?
Yeah,
Because those games
yeah.
were all built with the N64 controller in mind. And so when you remap those inputs on a different controller, it doesn't work the same way. It doesn't work quite the same way, right? Um, and so uh, and so having the NES controllers, I feel like will be the same way because all of those games I played originally on an NES controller, right? And so having those in my hands, it feels like it'll be even more. It'll take the nostalgia up another level at the very least, right?
Mhm.
Even if the muscle memory isn't the same. But I will say every single game that I have played, um, using the original controller that it was intended to be played on, I have played better, right? So going and playing Yoshi's Island on the Switch, which is a Super Nintendo game, playing that with the Super Nintendo controller that I play it better than when I'm trying to play it on the Pro controller, right?
Hmm.
Um, and some of that I'm certain is psychosomatic, right? It is sort of that muscle memory. It is that familiarity of my youth, and not actually a component of the hardware. At least with SNES games, because the controllers are pretty similar to the Pro controller. The D-pad is in a different place, but not
Hmm.
prohibitively different. But at least, I do think that there is a component of just the physicality of the controller that the game was designed for that makes a difference. It's especially true on the N64, and I actually suspect it'll be pretty true on the Genesis as well, because the Genesis had a very unique button layout as well. Just the three
Yeah.
buttons next to each other, right? And so
Yeah.
that's a very very different it's a very different layout than the standard four face button layout that's on the Pro controllers. So I'm curious about that one too, to see if some of my muscle memory on the Genesis comes back.
What's funny is how all these iterations of Nintendo and their control as well with any system, and there's always the assumption that newer is better. But this is a great example of not necessarily. It's pretty crazy how some of these games are really tailor made for
Mm-hmm.
uh, an old school controller. Even though you have all these other bells and whistles for a certain type of controller, like you're saying, like muscle memory and everything else kind of has a factor too, especially if you're younger and you're playing a certain game. There's a certain rhythm and a certain spacing that your fingers remember.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that especially with Mega Man, playing Mega Man 1 and 2, like dealing with what's it, Yellow Devil, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, where
Memorizing.
I was,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and then so memorization is one thing, but also the spacing of the buttons and how high you have to jump to avoid some of
Mm-hmm.
Yellow Devil's like little globs coming at you and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was to play that on a pro controller in today's setting, I don't know if I'd be as good as I would be on that good old fashioned classic rectangular NES controller. Um, so yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. Like new isn't necessarily better.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I totally agree. One game in particular, I remember this. Okay, so Jet Force Gemini.
Uh-huh.
It was one of my favorite Nintendo 64 games. One of the last great Rare games that
Yep.
was ever released.
Yeah.
Back when
Great
Rare
game.
just like could do no wrong. Like everything that they released was just gold. Um, they did, and this remains to my the most played game on my Xbox One. But they did for the 20 Rare's 25th anniversary. They did this collection called Rare Replay, where they put basically every game that Rare had ever developed into a single package, right? As an interesting aside, Rare was so insistent upon getting their Xbox One games in on this package, not Xbox One, Xbox original games on the
Hmm.
package, that they helped Microsoft develop the Xbox emulation software that Microsoft then went to use to port over a bunch of old other Xbox original games. Um, and Xbox 360 actually. That the emulator that they built for Rare Replay ended up getting repurposed for all of the backward compatibility for their other products. Really, really interesting stuff. But uh, um, uh, Jet Force Gemini, of course, was in that collection, and it was impossible to play using an Xbox One controller. Not because the Xbox One controller is bad. I mean, I praised the Xbox controller more than once on this podcast, and it was just that the way the game was built, the the Xbox controller doesn't have the sort of six button face layout,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And so they mapped the four yellow C stick buttons to the right thumbstick, which did not work very well. And ultimately, Rare actually went back to their credit and completely redesigned the controls for the game to work on an Xbox One controller.
Wow. Okay.
And it made the game playable, but they had to completely redesign the controls to make it work on the Xbox One. And now it's available on the Switch, right? But I have a Nintendo 64 wireless controller, and so I can play it. And I was amazing. It was just so easy to hop back in and play it. It was just effortless, right?
Hmm.
Again, because the game was built for this very unique input style.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just, man, that was all over the place. But yes, the NES World Championship or Nintendo World Championship NES edition is very fun. I think that its real lasting impact, if it can find an audience, will be its multiplayer, local multiplayer mode, right? Because while the single player mode, you will be chasing that perfect time, and that's sort of the fun of it, is replaying those challenges over and over again until you perfect it that one time. The chances of you perfecting it regularly are very low if you're just playing with friends. And so even if you set that really, really high score once, it's unlikely that you're going to set it over and over again, right? Um, and so playing with friends, your times will probably be lower, but to
Hmm.
the benefit of the experience, because you'll be competing with your friends on it, right?
And trash talking and everything
And
else
trash
that goes on.
talking, right? Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, again, another one, two games that just happened to come out on the same day that I just happen to both be interested in. Both of them I like a great deal so far. Um, and when I get the NES controller, I will definitely go back and really dive into the World
Yeah.
Championship. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, for all we know, we might have another review of a controller next stream,
We'll see.
by that
Two
time.
two controllers because I drunkenly bought the Genesis one too.
That's right. Yeah, so you'll be able to play Altered Beast a little bit maybe
Ooh,
next
I can't wait.
weekend
Oh man, I loved Altered Beast.
with a good old
God,
fashioned Sega Genesis
rise from your
controller.
grave.
Yeah. And then you can get in some NES Championship as well.
Oh
So that'll
God,
be good.
there's so many great games on the Genesis. What a great platform. Man, there was so much good
Yeah.
stuff on the Genesis.
Yeah. Yeah.
It got
Yeah, it's
it.
in a
Yeah, I mean, I think it is to a certain extent. It is become the secondary system because the Super Nintendo is just an icon of consoles of that era, right? I mean, it's just
yeah.
there's nothing that's gonna compete with the Super Nintendo. But the Genesis had just so many amazing games on it.
Yeah, it was still you can consider that their heyday for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. And then they sort of they had the right ideas, they just kept spending on tech like Sega Saturn and all that type of stuff. And
Yeah.
then it finally just kind of again, as much as everybody loves the Dreamcast, it's just they put all their marbles in on Dreamcast, and I think that was the beginning of the end. And
Yeah.
then next thing you know, the unholy alliance, you started seeing Sonic on Nintendo platforms, soon after
I
he
mean,
had to stay alive.
I will never forget the day that my copy of Sonic Advance showed up for my Game Boy Advance and my copy of Sonic Adventure 2 showed up for my
Yeah,
GameCube, and they
yeah, it's
had
so
Game
wrong.
Boy Link cable compatibility, and so you could like
Yeah,
send chows from Sonic Advance to Sonic Adventure 2, and I'm
yeah,
like doing this going, I can't. What kind of bizarro world are we living in right now? Is the Stay
the
Puft
unholy,
Marshmallow? Yeah, exactly. I just.
yeah, unholy alliance, and then and to
Mm-hmm.
me, it was encapsulated by whatever this called, like the Mario Sega, like the Nintendo Sega Olympics with Sega, I mean with
Yeah,
Sonic on one
Sonic and
side and Mario on
Mario.
the other side
Yeah,
in the Olympic. Like, oh my gosh, they're sharing the same cover now. Like it's over for Sega. They're
yeah.
done.
I remember. I think the first game that Sega ever released on a non-Sega platform was Choo Choo Rocket for the Game Boy Advance. And if
Okay.
you've never played Choo Choo Rocket, it is one of the most entertaining puzzle games I've ever played. Really, really fun graphics, really interesting um, gameplay mechanics. Basically, you're trying to get an array of mice into a rocket ship to take off to space for reasons that are never really
Mm.
explained, but who cares?
Mhm.
Um, and there's all these different obstacles. It's sort of a little bit like Lemmings, except that you don't. It's more like just directing their
Mhm.
foreign motion, and it's less complicated than Lemmings are. Because the choo-choos just always want to move forward, and so it's up to you to move them forward in a constructive way rather than them dying, right?
Mhm.
And it had like a level editor that was super fun, so you could build your own puzzles and things of that nature. Um, but yeah, that was the first game I remember, first Sega game I remember buying on a Nintendo platform was Choo Choo Rocket for the Game Boy Advance.
Beginning of the end for Sega, in
It
a way.
was
I mean,
well,
but they're still
they're
making
holding
cool
strong
stuff.
now. Yeah, they're still making great
Yeah.
cool stuff,
Yeah.
and hell, like the Sonic the Hedgehog movies. I mean, forget about it,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. They're
everybody
okay.
loves
They're
those
all right.
movies. I
They
agree
don't
with
need
you.
to be. Yeah, they don't need to be in that console war business. They're fine.
No,
They're making software. They've done their. They've survived.
yes,
They've risen from the ashes in a way. So that's good.
yes, yes.
So,
Anyway, we've been going for
um,
about 40 minutes now. I think we might be wrapping
yeah,
up here.
yeah, we're pretty much at a good spot. I'll go over what transpired as far as Calamity. So yeah, we have assets now for her walking away from camera.
Hmm.
She reacts to what's going on outside of Prickly Pear. So I'll just play through. Whoa, whoa, and then
Are
Mitchell
you
has this
coming or
line,
going,
and
lady?
then
Yeah.
yeah, are you coming or going? And then
Oh,
not
not
another
that
one.
one.
And then she starts backing away and she starts fidgeting with her hoodie. And then this next shot will be her pulling the gun back out, brandishing the gun, in
Okay.
attempts to try to be just like Uncle Leon,
Just
being a
like Uncle Leon,
badass.
right?
Yeah, just like
As
what Uncle
but
Leon
as
would do.
but as we learn, and as the whole point of Calamity is like just emulating someone else is never going to get you to where you want to
No,
be. You
no.
have to pave your own path. So
Yeah.
it's an important moment for her. I hope it works. I hope when people see the final cartoon, they kind of see what we're going for here. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, that'll about wrap us up for the evening. You can check us out on calamityjane.rocks. It'll take you to our Patreon site. Please consider joining the Patreon and helping us make this cartoon a reality. Um, you can also find us on YouTube and Facebook, which presumably you already have since you're watching the stream. And we're also on Instagram where we post occasionally some fun things here and there. And we've got a few things in the works, so stay tuned for that. And otherwise, we'll be back next week at the same calamity time, same calamity channel. Stay safe out there, everybody. Have a good night. Good night.
Good night.